Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Sarah Lappin. I am head of architecture at Queen's University, and I'm going to talk you through some of the wonderful things about architecture, about studying architecture, and what you can do with an architecture degree. I'm sort of a case in point. I studied architecture in the US, and I've done all kinds of different jobs as an architect. I have been working in an architectural publishing house. I worked in the preservation of important buildings from previous centuries. I have worked on leisure centers. I've worked on hospitals. And I've been at Queen's for quite a long time now, teaching history and theory and design and professional skills. And that's probably the thing that I love most about having studied architecture and having been an architect is all the different things that you can do with an architecture degree. So one of the things that I want to talk to you all about is some myths that have developed around architecture. We did quite a bit of work in the last year or so, speaking to art and design teachers and to technology teachers and to people who give careers advice. And we found out that there were several myths about architecture. So we want to sort of bust a few of those as we begin. One of the first things is that there's a myth that you have to have studied physics and maths and art to study architecture, and that is no longer the case. And certainly at Queen's, we really think that the breadth of the profession is important. And so we like to have a myriad of different academic backgrounds on the course. And we think that diversity on the course makes our profession much better. It makes the course much better. So we have students who study everything from biology to film to technical drawing to music. The one thing that we do ask for is that you have an art portfolio, and you can either have developed that when you are taking art A level or GCSE level, or you can put together a portfolio yourself and you can send that to us for evaluation. So please don't think that if you haven't taken art or physics or maths that architecture cannot be for you, because that's no longer the case. So that's a really important thing to bust. And I say we really like to have students with lots of different backgrounds. The next thing is that a lot of people think that the architecture course is 7 full years in university and that it takes a really long time. And that's not true either. So the way it works right now in the UK is that you do 3 years in undergrad and you get either a Bachelor of Arts or a Bachelor of Science. At Queen's, it's a Bachelor of Science. And then you have to do 2 years on what's called a master's course. But you do get to spend some time in between your bachelor's and in your master's working in an office. You can also take time in the middle of your studies to work in an office, and it needn't necessarily be an architecture firm either. You could work in kind of a cognate discipline, like with planners or with landscape architects, or you could go work somewhere else entirely as well. So you're not spending 7 years in university paying fees. That's a really important thing to remember, and also to remember that you can take breaks in there if, for whatever reason, you need to do so. So that's an important myth to bust too. So this is kind of one way that you can get through an architecture course and get into the career of architecture. So you can see the blue rectangle there relates to the first 3 years that you do as an undergraduate. And then normally students take at least 1 year out. And we call that earning and learning. So you're actually in an office, you're making money to help pay the bills. And then sometimes students take more than 1 year. Maybe they get a job in a great office and they want to continue there. And we absolutely encourage students to do that. Quite a few of our students will spend a year maybe earning quite a bit and then traveling for the next year or for the next 6 months or so. And again, seeing architecture and different cultures from around the world, we encourage very heavily as well. Then the orange box is the amount of time that you spend doing your master's. At Queen's, we call that a Master's of Architecture or an MArch. And that usually lasts for 2 years. You get the summer off, though, which is quite nice. So you don't have to work over the summer. And you can go work in an office or go work somewhere else to make money during that period, too. And then normally after people finish their master's, they do at least 1 more year in practice, again, earning and learning, where they're doing something called the Part 3. And in that time, you would come into university maybe once a week or maybe once every 2 weeks. And you would learn a lot about things like contracts, how to run an office, those sorts of things. And then you take an exam at the end of that period, and then you're a validated architect. One of the reasons why it takes a while to get to be able to call yourself a validated architect, and it is a protected term in the UK, nobody can call themselves an architect unless they've been through this or a very similar process, is because it takes a lot of skills and a lot of knowledge. Think about what you're responsible for when you make a building. It has to be designed well, it has to keep the weather out, it has to come in on budget, it has to stand up. It should be beautiful if it can. It needs to work for a long time. You need to think about climate emergency, sustainability, etc. So it's you've got a lot of responsibility when you're making a building, and that's one of the reasons why it takes the 5 years in school and then the earning and learning years as well. Okay. One of the other things is that when you study architecture, you don't necessarily have to become an architect, and there's no one way of being an architect as well. So it's a very broad discipline that allows you to do lots of different types of architectural practice. So these are just some examples of colleagues of mine or projects that others who we know have worked on. We have conservation architects. We have people who do things for the city. We have people who make very beautiful houses in rural landscapes. We have people who are very concerned about the climate emergency and sustainability. We have people who specialize in various types of buildings, so schools or hospitals. A lot of people in architecture go on to work with communities quite a lot. And we also have people who in architecture who go on to then do graphic design, film, etc. Lots of different types of careers. And here's kind of a list of some samples of things that our students have gone on to do. We have people who've gone on to work specifically in housing or healthcare. We have people who go into research and innovation, particularly in terms of products. And we have people who don't necessarily make the architecture, but become the client. So, for example, if you work for a very large company and they have buildings all over the world, you might be the person who acts as the client and interfaces with the architect. And those are really great jobs to have too. And as I was alluding to there, an architecture degree can lead to multiple careers, not just, maybe what you would call your standard architecture. So these are some examples of work that both our staff and students have done. We have an artist in residence at a particular Spanish villa at the minute. We've also had people who do exhibitions, and we also have had students who have worked quite a lot, actually, quite extensively in the film and television industry, not least because it's such an important industry in Northern Ireland at the moment. So lots and lots of different things you can do. We have quite a few students who've gone on to become architectural photographers. We have a student who's just finished a job of several years as a journalist, as I say, set design, and quite a few students have gone into web design, etc. So there's lots of different things that you can do with an architecture degree if you decide not to become an architect who specifically makes buildings. The other thing, I suppose, is to say that we really need architects. Our society really needs architects. If you think about the things that are happening at the moment in terms of the climate emergency and climate change, but also in terms of what the COVID-19 crisis has shown us, we really need to think about how cities are organized, where there are bike lanes. We need to think about how people are housed, what it's like to work at home. All of those things are becoming increasingly important. And what's great about people who are trained as architects is they're really good at thinking through those, what we call wicked problems, really tricky problems that need people with design expertise as well as the ability to analyze and come up with really interesting solutions to tough problems. So we need architects. So I want to talk a little bit about Queen's University's architecture school, because there are several things that make us unique, and it's important for you if you're starting to think about becoming an architect and you're starting to look at schools. These are some of the questions that you should be asking the schools that you're going around and visiting. And I would really strongly recommend, if you can, to visit any architecture school you're interested in. So what makes Queen's architecture unique? Well, one of the things is we're a very old architecture school. We're a very old university as well. So we've been around since 1845. And the university decided to found an architecture school in 1965, which means that we've been around. We're one of the oldest architecture schools in the country. And that means that we're very well established, both within the local profession. So we know, a lot of the people who work in Northern Ireland and on the island of Ireland, but we know people around the world as well. And that's important. We've been around for a long time. We've got a lot of experience. I suppose another thing to say is that we are part of the Russell Group. And if you've never heard of the Russell Group, it's a group of universities in which people are fantastic at teaching, but they also are very, very heavily active in their research. And the reason why that's important is that you want to have people who are at the cutting edge of expertise teaching you. That's what you want. And the other thing is that then that can start to help you think about, maybe I want to become a researcher, or maybe I want to become an academic. The other universities that are in the Russell Group are places like Cambridge, Oxford, University of Edinburgh, London School of Economics, places like that. So it's definitely something that our students have said to us is very important to them, that being able to say they went to a Russell Group university is really important. And we're quite proud to have that badge at Queen's. I suppose another issue is that people like to think about high rankings in various league tables. And we are always placed very highly in them. We have a lot of high student satisfaction. We have students who are able to get employment. We have a lot of students talk a lot about their experience at Queen's being a wonderful family, kind of a smaller family. And we're usually ranked in high rankings, whether it's the Times or the Guardian or any of those league rankings. And we're very proud of that too. Probably one of the most unique things about Queen's architecture, though, is that every student gets a desk. And this means that we have something that's called a very strong studio culture. And that means that you get to see us quite a lot. In architecture, you have a lot of contact time with staff and with older students, but you also have enormous amounts of contact time with each other. So instead of maybe going to the library and reading by yourself and maybe going home and doing your work there and working on essays at home, you get to come into the studio and you get to work in the studio if you choose to do so. And we strongly encourage students to. There are very, very few architecture schools in the UK that have that ability to provide that kind of space for students anymore. And we're very, very proud of that. So this is a really good question to ask when you're going around to architecture schools. Do I get a desk? How long do I get a desk? Do I have to hot desk with other people? How often do I get to see my colleagues? And how often do I get to see my tutors? But it's great because that means that, if you're not very good at making models, you can look at somebody next to you who's making a model and they can help you. And then similarly, if you're great at drawing, you've done a lot of technical drawing in the past, and you have a colleague, a friend across the table who doesn't really know what he or she is doing, you can help them as well. And so it becomes a very collective teamwork kind of environment. It's wonderful. It's really great. Another thing I think we're unique doing is we are very much ingrained in our societies and in our communities. So we have a live project that runs every year, and we work a lot with local communities, with local schools, etc., trying to help them figure out, maybe they have a playground, for example. One of these images shows that they need to have designed, or if they're trying to figure out a way to make their cities healthier, parts of the cities healthier. We kind of work with communities on real projects in real time, and we present that information back to our clients, which students really, really enjoy. I suppose another question that we get asked often is, are you accredited by the RIBA? The RIBA is the Royal Institute of British Architects, and they come around to different schools of architecture about every 5 years, and they make sure that what we're doing is what we need to be doing to teach you how to become architects. And we have been accredited for many, many decades. This isn't something that's new to us. We have another visit coming up in June 2021. It's an onerous and very serious process. We take it very seriously. But we aren't a new school of architecture, and that is something that you want to ask. And when you're going around and looking at architecture schools, are you accredited by the RIBA? And again, Queen's has been for many, many years. I think this is an interesting point, that there's a high proportion of our staff and students from around the world, and that's increasingly so. I think there's another slide about this later, but obviously, I'm not from Northern Ireland. I'm from the United States, and many of my colleagues hail from lots of different parts of the world, from Turkey to Argentina, and from the Republic of Ireland and East Belfast. So we have a lovely combination of staff who are from this place, and then people who've come and made Belfast their home as well. And that's becoming increasingly true of students. About half of our students aren't from Northern Ireland, and we have students from around the world too. So we're quite excited about that. I think that Belfast is a terrific place to study architecture. It's a very friendly city. It's a very walkable city as well. And I think that's a really important thing. When you're studying architecture, you want to be able to have the time to sort of look around at buildings and see how they're made and why you find certain buildings powerful and maybe not others. And Belfast has a great tradition of wonderful buildings that we want to conserve, like St. Malachy's Church on this slide. We also have some incredibly important buildings from the 1950s and 60s, like the addition to the Ulster Museum that you see there in black and white. And then we have recent, very prominent award-winning buildings as well, including the Lyric Theatre and the Metropolitan Arts Centre. So there's a wonderful sort of older building stock in Belfast, and then there's also newer buildings that are very exciting too. So I've already talked about this. We have a wonderful diversity of students. Somewhere between 45 and 50% of our students come from outside of Northern Ireland, which is great. I think another thing that's important for you when you're going around asking other schools is how do the studios organized? So the studio is the main place where you learn how to make drawings and you learn how to design. And sometimes in some architecture schools, those are run by people who come in from practice and then they leave. We think having people from practice coming in is absolutely vital to making the program vibrant, but we also think that it's important to have people who are very experienced teachers kind of paired up with people from outside. And so that there's an idea about why we're teaching you what we're teaching you and in what sequence, but then you also have people who are in practice who are at the cutting edge. That's an important combination to have. We feel quite strongly that you shouldn't have one without the other. And so we have, that's a really important thing for you to think about too, I think. We have a lot of really fantastic staff, I have to say, internationally known, internationally winning of competitions and commissions, patents, and things like that. And we also have wonderful visiting staff who come in sometimes on a week-to-week basis to teach students, and sometimes we have visiting people as well. So we have people who come in from all around the world to give critique of students' work. This is another good one to ask when you go to different architecture schools. What's the staff-student ratio? How many students, particularly again in studio, do you have per tutor? So with us, we try to keep it around about 1 tutor talks to 12 students at a time. And normally we have 2 tutors and then say 24 or 25 students. So you're always hearing from 2 different people, which I think is very good for you to start to develop your own design techniques. But it also means that you're still kind of within a small team and you're well looked after. And you look after each other really well when you're in a group like that. So that's another good question to ask. What's your staff-student ratio in studio? A very high percentage of our graduates do become registered architects. That's not necessarily true of every school of architecture, and that's not necessarily a good thing or a bad thing. But if you are interested in becoming a registered architect, then Queen's might be a good choice for you. We also, and increasingly so, I'd say over the years, we have quite high profile practices from around the world employing our graduates. We know we have had 3 graduates just finished and they've gone to work in Switzerland. We've had students in New York, we've had students in Portugal, we've had students kind of around the world. And then we have students returning home, of course, to places like Hong Kong, Singapore, Beijing. So we do have students working in quite high profile offices around the world. So those are some of the things that make us unique. And I wanted to talk a little bit about how we are structuring our course. And so I'll run through that quickly, but I think these are some questions that students do like to ask. So one of the things students who are coming out of school often ask is, how much time do I spend? And as I alluded to earlier, we have quite a few contact time with contact hours with students. So that's not necessarily the case of every course. Some courses don't have quite as much as we do, but this diagram gives you some idea. On a Monday morning, you'd probably come in and see me if you were in first year, and you'd have a 2-hour lecture with me about history and theory. And then you might go into the studio in the afternoon and maybe work on a drawing project. On a Tuesday, you'd probably go in and have maybe a workshop about technology for a few hours. And then on Wednesday morning, all of Wednesday morning, you might be in the studio, again, learning how to make models. You're being taught how to make models, or taught how to use Photoshop, or taught how to use AutoCAD, things like that. And then all day Thursday, we're actually in the studio. So that means that the staff are all there, and we're sitting and we're talking to you about your designs, and we're talking to you about how you've made your drawings and your models. And we do that specifically with you for about half an hour, 45 minutes, but then you can work in the studio and you can kind of listen in on all the other conversations that are happening around. And we do like students to be in for that full day if they can, because again, that's another opportunity where you can talk to your colleagues. And then all day Friday is often a good opportunity where we might not necessarily be in the studio, but particularly if you're working on a group project, all of your group would be there and you would be working together. We do have, though, blocks where we're not talking to you, and it's not a 9 to 5 kind of an operation like it is maybe at school where you are now. And then we do try to leave Wednesday afternoons open so the students can join in with clubs and societies, or play music, or if you have caring responsibilities, or if you need to have a job, those sorts of things, we try to leave Wednesday afternoon open for that. We take very seriously the transition into university by students. We think that's really important. So we spend a lot of time thinking how a first-year student might be going from being in school to a university, and that's a very big, different environment. So we spend a lot of time helping students in that. One of the main things we do is, again, we have this wonderful peer support in architecture. So we are in the studio, and you have a lot of other people you can lean on, and you can ask each other questions. We do a lot of group work, and that means that you're not necessarily all on your own trying to figure something out, but you're working with each other. And we also have quite a bit of learning support at Queen's. We have something called the Learning Development Service, which helps people who might be having a little bit of trouble with maths or with English, and they're wonderful resources. I think this is important too. We really do spend a lot of time and a lot of our budget on teaching you skills. so that you can learn how to draw and make models as quickly as possible so that you can communicate then your wonderful ideas. We're not going to just say, go draw a bunch of buildings and not teach you how to do that. We do teach you how to do that. And that applies to drawings, but it also applies to lots of different types of drawings you can make, whether it's by hand or by computer. And then that also applies to models. So these are all models that students have made over the years. Very, very detailed, very beautiful, and sometimes very difficult to tell from the real thing, actually. So as I say, studio culture is really important, and that really helps students to bond with each other and to support each other, and that's a really important thing that we have at Queen's. We also have very high levels of pastoral care, and we have an excellent counseling service at Queen's. So if you're having issues, if you have a bereavement in your family, or if you're having trouble with paying your bills, or if you're just having a bit of a tough time academically, we have lots and lots of support for that too, particularly with the Queen's counseling service. You get a lot of feedback from your staff and from your peers. You get constant feedback. It's not like you work all semester and then you submit something and then you magically get a mark for it. You get every week you get feedback on your different assignments that you're working on, particularly in studio. And again, what's really lovely is that in architecture you get feedback from your peers too. So your peers might say to you, I don't really like that, move that around. And then again, it's really important for you to hear from more than just me. So this is my colleague Tarla. So you might be hearing from Tarla and I one day. And we might have very different opinions, but then you have to start to come up with your own rules for yourself about how you're going to make architecture. And then also it's really important is you guys give feedback to us as well. So we want to know how we can make the course better, and we try to do that very quickly. So if there's a problem, we want our students to tell us about it so we can rectify it. And then we also want to know at the end of the year what went well, what didn't go well, and how we can improve things. So I suppose our course is really very much about being both professional, like you learning to be an architect, learning how to run an office, learning how to make clients happy, but also to be really creative. So not necessarily just doing what the client thinks that they want, but getting them to think maybe more open, more in a more interesting way about how they might solve problems. And what's lovely about architecture is it's kind of a coming together of a science and an art. A lot of people ask us what's the difference between a BSc architecture and a Bachelor of Arts or a BA of architecture. We have a BSc. There's not actually that much difference, actually, because we're all regulated by the same people and we have to provide you with certain learning. But I think for Queen's, we really emphasize we want you to know how to make buildings. We want you to know how to put them together and how bricks go together and how steel stands up. But we also want you to be really creative in how you might use the steel and how you use the bricks. So we think it's an important combination of being professional, but also being very creative. Just a few more slides, a few other issues to consider, I think, that are important about when you're thinking about Queen's, but also thinking about architecture. You do spend a lot of time in the studio with each other, and it's important for you to get out and be around people who aren't necessarily architects all the time. So that's what's one of the great things about living in halls at Queen's in the first year, because you get to meet people from different disciplines. So you might have a friend who you share a kitchen with who's in medicine and another friend who's studying English. And I think that's a really cool thing to do. And that then can continue all the way up through Queen's. I suppose another thing is that we're very social. We have something called the Architecture Society, or ArtSoc, and they organize a lecture series. They organize kind of friendly mixers and get-togethers. We always have a wonderful formal every year. This was held in City Hall a few years ago. We just this year had ours in St. Anne's Cathedral. The staff go, we get all dressed up, and it's really good fun. But ArcSoc also organizes things like this. So this is a visit to the Titanic building before it was turned into a hotel, and our students got to see it when it was still in its slightly ruined state. This is where the Titanic was actually designed, and you can see what a beautiful workspace it would have been. There's no electric light on in that image. It's just sunlight coming in through the windows. So our students help organize things like that, really cool activities. There are international opportunities in a normal year, in a non-COVID year, but we love to take our students to see other cities and to see other architectural cultures. Usually we limit ourselves to Europe. I'm trying to think if we've ever really gone outside of Europe. We've gone to Turkey, we've been to Scandinavia. Sometimes we go very close to cities like Edinburgh. This is an image of students in Rome. And we try to do that for at least a couple of years in the undergraduate course and then in the master's course as well. And those are great visits. I think the students get an enormous amount out of these trips, and we're looking forward to them being able to restart as soon as COVID calms down a little bit. There's lots of ways for you to find out more about us. We have the obvious, the normal Queen's University Belfast pages, and you can see lots of kind of overview. We do have a really cool website, though, I have to say. It's architecture@queens.co.uk. And we designed this specially for us to be able to show student work. So it's kind of like an external archive of all of our student work, but it will also give you information about our staff, the research that we've been doing, some of our PhD students. It'll give you descriptions about the different types of courses that we have as well. So www.architecture@queens.co.uk. And then we also have a very active Twitter feed as well, @QUBARCH. Hashtag. We had Arch declares this year because we declared a climate emergency, and that's quite active. Also, if you search from the website, you will be able to find the links to all of our Instagram pages. What we try to do is each studio will have its own Instagram page, and so you'll be able to follow sort of what they did each year, etc. Okay, so those are some of the main details about architecture. If you have any questions, you can of course, you can ask us at any time. It's a really wonderful course. It's a great combination of designing in studio, which is, the biggest chunk of what you do. And then you learn about technology, you learn about how buildings go together, and then you learn about history and theory, you learn about the important buildings of the past, and you learn how to do research, and you learn how to write. And so it's a lovely package of ways of thinking, types of knowledge, and it allows you to go on to be an architect, and it allows you to go on to do lots of different types of study and also professions as well. So please let us know if you have any questions, and good luck in everything you're doing and all your choices. It's very nice to meet you, and goodbye.